All righty. Okay. Welcome everyone to our Environment Committee public hearing on a Title 13 update to the code. The intention of this hearing is to review changes to Title 13 regarding refuse collection of the Columbus City Code. I'm joined by my colleague, Councilmember Michael Stinziano. Thank you for being here. And I am also joined by Tim Swager, who's Administrator of the Refuse Division in the Department of Public Service. At this point, with really kind of limited preamble, I will thank you for the work that you've done to propose this change. And I will turn it over to you, Mr. Swager, to detail some of the changes, some of the reasons that the division is proposing them, and then some of the possible effects, as you can guess at this point.
Thank you, council members. Yes, Title 13 was last updated in 1997, so it's been 20 years since Title 13 has been updated. So there's obviously there are some changes being asked within this. The major changes that are going to be in the Title 13 changes would be future multi-dwelling developments would no longer be eligible for service, proposed for if they do not pull a building permit within 1 year from the date of enactment of this code. So anyone in the planning process right now would still be eligible for service as long as they go through zoning, pull their building permit. And this is typical how we've grandfathered other clauses in. That way, for planning purposes, anyone in that process doesn't get caught up with a change. So that's why we'll allow the 1 year for that. Another major change is if you can opt out of service during the development of a project, meaning that you choose not to have Columbus Refuse Division service your property, and at a later date, if someone wants to opt back in, they can request that. The challenge for us with that has been typically a development maybe in the planning process would opt out and therefore not have to meet the requirements of the Title 13 refuse requirements for trash service and radiuses and clearances and things of that nature. And then when the development's done and it is occupied, then we get requests to opt back into service, and it becomes very difficult, if not impossible sometimes, to provide that service because they weren't built to our standards. As a result of that, we're proposing that if you opt out from service, there is no opting back in at a later date as a result of those difficulties. Other than that, we've got some minor changes in the entry boxes and stuff like that where we have dumpster service, just clearly defining what we want to see there. And then we've also changed on the zoning appeals, on the appeals board. There's currently in the 1997 code, there's a refuse appeals board that was never formed, has never existed. So in the new code, we're proposing, after talking to the development department who already has a property maintenance appeals board in place and that is active, they've agreed to hear appeals for us for Title 13 since that board is already existing. Other than that, I mean, those are the major changes. There are some minor changes. If there's any specific questions I can go over, I think everyone's been provided a copy of the code.
Do you have a copy? Okay, thank you. I will actually, I'll ask a question, one more question kind of on context, and then I want to open it up to the council member. So I know you said we haven't had a code update since, a Title 13 update since 1997. And the division is recommending this in particular because of concerns with growth in this type of product. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like, kind of where the concerns are and what that may mean in the future in terms of the fiscal position of the city?
Yes, excellent question. Yeah, on the multi-dwelling development, we're seeing a lot of that in the city of Columbus area and coming through. And the challenges we're having there are multifold. One is just the sheer numbers being built out there, and then two, the distance of the drive out to our stations. We currently have 3 stations within the city of Columbus that pick up, and these are the refuse collection stations at Morris Road, Georgesville, and Alum Creek. The development that's occurring, a lot of that development's in the outer lying areas and the recently annexed, and the drive there, at some point, we're reaching that threshold where we cannot service them any longer without building another transfer station or collection station, and also we have difficulties getting the routes done for the day without expanding services or cutting services, just the very basic services that we currently have for the residential units that we already maintain.
And given that we do offer the service, for free, it would be a matter, we basically be increasing costs without any additional revenue to try to meet that need, right? If we were to go under the current model, if we would need to build a new collection station, or start expanding routes and bringing on more drivers and trucks, it's essentially, we'd have to find new money in the budget we already have to allocate towards refuse. Is that the general picture?
Yes, that is. We're general fund. The Division of Refuse is all general fund spending, so any increases in these services the monies would have to be found somewhere to add to these. So we're really trying to work within our current budget. As part of this also, we are implementing route optimization on our current residential routing to try to find efficiencies there. We're reaching every aspect of our operations to look for efficiencies so that we can just sustain what we currently have.
Okay. Thank you. Council member?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the department and for the presentation. I do have a couple questions. So how does this proposal align us with other similar sized cities, or kind of where does this fall? Is this normally where there's multi-units something that doesn't provide it, or is this an outlier?
For large cities, we are one of the, if not only one, we're the only one I can find that we typically compare ourselves to that offers multi-dwelling development refuse services by the city. Other cities our size consider them commercial properties, and therefore they would be treated like other commercial properties in the city, restaurants and businesses that we do not collect currently and do not propose that we collect. So when you're looking at the greater refuse areas that we would compare ourselves to, they have never collected these types of developments. We here in the city of Columbus have collected them, and we're up to this point, and that's why we're proposing that change. We are not proposing, though, that we take away services from all the current multi-dwelling developments.
Follow? So that's one of the questions that's come up in terms of that equity. So if it is inefficient, if it is something we're trying to now set a new standard of best practice, why have a 2-tier system where those are being grandfathered in versus those moving forward aren't? And how is that a more efficient and effective standard for across the city? I appreciate and I understand the pushback we would get without grandfathering, but just having a 2-tier system, how is that, to kind of your earlier point of looking for efficient routes and cost savings, this accomplishes that when there's 2 systems?
Yes, certainly if we did not do any more multi-dwelling developments within the city of Columbus, there'd be a savings to the division. This approach was basically brought up as the people that are here that have always received this service, we will continue. The 2-tier system, it's a more palatable way to implement it, quite honestly. If you would cut it out from everybody that's had this service. To be clear, too, multi-dwelling development collection services is very efficient. It's just the expansion of these is what's going to drive another station, and that capital outlay of the vehicles and the capital outlay of another outpost is the problematic side of that. But the current ones that are infill projects that we're already servicing or built into our routes, we were able to handle them with our current budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was there any discussion of maybe a surcharge to the newly constructed to help manage those costs? I mean, where I'm struggling is we know we're going to have growth. They won't always be multi-dwelling, but, you know, Director of Development has discussed the desire for more density, so we'll see more multi. But just in general, knowing our growth, knowing what's coming, I'm a little concerned that completely cutting off or not looking at alternatives like maybe a surcharge, at some point we probably will have to build another station. Maybe this speeds it up, but are we doing a disservice by having that two-tier approach?
Well, we have not looked at a specific surcharge. I have looked at many different operations and options for the division and present those through administration. The surcharge issue is separating out who gets charged and who doesn't. If we want to go to a charging system for multi-dwelling development, if that's what I think you're questioning. We do know what our cost would be. We do know that that is. Our issue would be we don't currently have a billing system. We don't have a collection system because we don't charge. It's built into the general fund. We'd have additional costs and startups and personnel to add to begin charging. So that's the challenge for us.
And last question, in the cities that you've looked at, do they do that? And we're just unique in that it's kind of part of the benefits of being a City of Columbus resident? Or do some cities have that billing surcharge built in? Or because, as you mentioned, some treat them like commercial versus not? Just trying to capture how many really cut them off completely, or if there's other provisions built in. Most cities actually charge everybody for trash separately that we look at. We're one of the very rare cities that includes that into your general fund spending. So most of them do charge. They charge typically through their utilities division, and it's a surcharge on there. But that's for all residences when they do that we see. The other cities that I've compared to, they simply do not offer the service to the multifamily developments, or I should say the multi-dwelling development.
Thank you, Council Member. And we were also joined by Council Member Shannon Hardin. Thank you for being here. At this point, do you have any questions, Council Member? Yeah.
Not really a question, but comment, one of appreciation to you for holding this hearing and having this conversation. But I have a lot of respect for Tim, and these policy conversations that we're having right now are very important. As Councilmember Cinziano alluded to, our growth will make these conversations more and more relevant and more important. And the solutions aren't necessarily easy to come to, and they are dollar and cents conversations, but they're also just an equity conversation of how we're serving as many of our residents as possible, with also being good stewards of the city dollar. And so watching you under the leadership of Chair Brown go through this process is just a word of appreciation to you, Tim, and your team, and to Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Council Member. Since Councilmember Cinziano talked about the difference we'll now see, if we were to pass this, a development that hasn't pulled their permits yet and is going to be developed in, let's say, 2019, versus a development that is in the ground right now, about to open. Residents at one could be paying, through their rent, a charge, and residents at the other obviously would be granting it for free. Can you help us understand what that difference will feel like to the residents? What is that cost increase that's possible by the owner of the project passing along, the additional cost to them?
Yes, I did a little research on this, and it obviously depends on collection method and type of services you want, if you have dumpsters versus 90-gallon containers, and also if you have recycling involved in that or not. But if you have 90-gallon service at your complex, the average cost was between $12 and $15 per month to those individual units on those, and that would be the 90-gallon service. Dumpster service can be a little cheaper than that when we looked, but it tends to be a little more difficult for the property managers to then divide that cost out. So from the units that we looked at, that we surveyed, they typically went with 90-gallon service and billed individually to each of the units, and that cost was between $12 and $15.
Okay. So potentially $180 a year at the higher end of cost quotations now per unit. So we've had one entity submit kind of an opponent testimony or opponent letter that wasn't able to be here to speak in person. And I did want to ask about one thing that they raised and that I've heard in a little bit of conversation that I haven't asked you about yet, Tim, so not to spring it on you, but relating to cost, we are as a city right now, and Councilmember Page is leading these discussions on how we achieve a greater stock, a greater supply of affordable housing. We are not meeting the need as a city right now, and as we grow, we will more aggressively need to confront that. Many affordable housing product, much of the affordable housing product can be multi-dwelling properties. And are there any, I know you're not an affordable housing expert, but are there any kind of cost mitigations would dumpsters really help those landlords be able to bring down the cost so they're not passing it along? You know, what are some potential strategies from the refuse collection side that if it's now on the property developer to charge for, they're not having to pass on that $180 a year, which is significant, you know, to somebody that's in a voucher-based program or, you know, at 50% of area median income?
I don't have a specific answer on that. I mean, certainly through experience, the dumpster service is a cheaper way to go because you're picking up, you know, 16 units with one vehicle. You know, one dump of that dumpster equals 16 units. So it's obviously a more efficient way to collect the trash. Separate from that, I could certainly, at this point, reach out to our partners at SWACO and talk to them about the consortiums and see if there's any opportunities there. That's just a thought. I haven't obviously spoken to them about it, but there are. I would be happy to look into that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cinziano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, in terms of the proposal, was there any consideration that we would offer services to any of the new builds, that because we have a truck picking up to an old multi-unit dwelling, would we be willing to bid for that private service? Or I know historically we don't do that, and I've appreciated your leadership and some of the entities around town that wanted pickup but weren't for a variety of other grandfather clauses. Is that something that the department is considering or would look to in the future?
That is something we're considering on multiple facets with bulk pickup, set-outs. There's several areas of this that we're looking at. Again, it goes back to the collection of those funds and setting that up. That's the difficulty in it, and that's the cost, the initial startup investment to get a call taker, to get collections and things of that nature set up. That would be one of our hurdles that we would have to get over.
Well, I don't have any other questions from my colleagues, and I don't think we have anyone signed up for public testimony, but we are happy to still take anyone if there is public comment or public questions. Yeah, would you come up to the microphone, please? Can you say your name, please, and your address, and if you're with an entity?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Robert Grinch. I work or reside in Columbus, 3506 Aaron Drive. It's an interesting conversation, and something I thought I'd just add to the conversation has to do with the compactors that I see in a lot of the multifamily development complexes. And I guess what I don't know is how if those are collected by the city or if a developer actually pays somebody to carry that away on their own or not. I don't know. But so maybe there's one question to explore. The other thing I've noticed, some of these compactors are not secured in the sense that a resident can come out and open up a metal panel door, to place their trash into a chute. But I've actually observed some young people, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, start to climb into one of those chutes while his buddy's ready to push the activation button. So I know this may not be the focus of this committee, but I think there is a concern perhaps with some of the development complexes that you may have an entrapment issue that you want to explore while you're just looking at this topic in general.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grinch, for your comments. Are you an area commission member? You're just an active participant.
I am a resident of the West Side area, which is a newly created commission area. I serve on the zoning committee.
The zoning committee, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Thank
Well, thank you for representing the West Scioto Area Commission here. And Mr. Swager, if you could speak especially to the first issue, that'd be great.
Yeah, in regards to the compactors, we do service a few compactors. The majority of those compactors are privately serviced, but the City of Columbus, we do allow developers. We only have a handful of them that we service. That is one area that we're also looking at currently, because from an operational efficiency standpoint, we go pick up the compactor, take it to the transfer station, dump it, and then have to return the compactor because we don't own the compactor box. So that's another area. Obviously, making 2 trips to each compactor location isn't the most efficient. We'd like to be able to swap those out and continue down. So we are looking at that compactor issue, but we only have a handful of those currently, mainly due to the cost constraints for a lot of the developers. But where they are, they do have a lot more of those in the private hauling business. As far as the safety issue there, I'm unaware of that, and I'd be happy to look into that as well.
Okay, thank you. And when someone does use a compactor, does that decrease their need for pickup, by half, by, instead of weekly, they only need it twice a month? Do you know?
Yeah, it can. It also decreases the capacity requirement that we have in the code. So you can put a compactor in and not be required to have as many dumpsters. So a lot of times the developers may choose to put a compactor in because the land may quite honestly be more valuable than having dumpsters sit on it. So a lot of times if they can develop that land in a better way, they may opt to put the compactor service in.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from my colleagues? Any other thoughts from the Division of Refuse?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity and looking forward to looking into these issues further and moving this along.
Thank you. And to any of those viewing, please don't hesitate to be in contact with my office or any of my colleagues' offices with thoughts and questions. And we really appreciate the time of the whole Division of Refuse, but particularly your leadership, Mr. Swager, in thinking through how we are making wise adjustments to Title 13, lo these 20 years where it sat untouched. So appreciate your time being here. Thank you to Council Members Hardin and Stinziano. And thank you to CTV for making this available to the public. Have a great evening.